Why is it that if a horse hits a fence during a race and gets injured, you say that it has gone lame? But you wouldn't say that a person who cannot walk is lame. But why not? For many centuries you could. Shakespeare did. I will not give a doit to relieve a lame beggar. A doit, by the way, is a small coin. I'm not saying that you can't use the word lame at all. If a student tells me that the dog ate his homework, I might call it a lame excuse, unless, of course, the dog really did eat his homework. A lame duck president is one who is still technically in office but no longer has powers. But nowadays, you would never call somebody with a disability as lame. That would be nasty. Language evolves, and over time the word lame acquired negative connotations. So in the early 19th century they came up with a kinder and more respectful way to describe a person with a disability, and that word was a cripple. Over time, cripple became taboo, so they coined a new kinder word, and that word was handicapped. Around the 1990s, handicapped fell out of favour to be replaced by disabled. But disabled is now viewed as inappropriate by some. And these days you'll often hear of a person with a disability or some similar term, which not everyone with a disability is happy with. This is a perfect example of the euphemism treadmill, a term coined by Steven Pinker in a 1994 article for The New Yorker. I'll leave a link in the description for Pinker's article. This is how it works. A polite expression is introduced into the language. Somewhere, someone starts to use that word as a slur or in a way that sounds distasteful. So over time, the word gets tainted and people want to play safe, so they seek out another word, a euphemism for the original word. The process repeats again and again. In the case of the euphemism treadmill, we are constantly trying to find the most respectful and accurate way to describe something, but each phrase we come up with has a lifespan, sometimes quite short lifespan. Today on LetThemTalkTV, we're going to look at the euphemism treadmill and how words can change over the course of a lunchtime. Okay, maybe not a lunchtime, but a lifetime, certainly. If you have to leave the room because you need to use this, what would you say to your entourage? In the 19th century, you may have heard it being described as a privy or a water closet, but this ended up sounding crude, so they euphemistically used toilet, which originally meant a piece of cloth. But by the early 19th century, it was used to mean getting dressed. Here's a quote. Mrs. Norris, in promoting gaieties for her nieces, assisting their toilets, displaying their accomplishments, and looking about for their future husband, had so much to do. That's from Mansfield Park, 1814. So water closet became toilet, then lavatory or loo. The origins of the word loo are interesting. It might be from French, l'eau, meaning water, or from the French lieu d'aisance, which literally means place of comfort. And let's take a detour here. If you need a euphemism, using a word from a foreign language is a good ploy, especially French. Think of how your derrière is a euphemism for arse. Never admit that you told a lie. Members of the jury, my client, Mr. Dashley, did not lie when he said he didn't evade paying taxes. He was simply being a little economical with the véracité. Returning to arse, that's how it's spelled in British English, but in American English it's ASS and pronounced ass, which is itself a euphemism. For the Puritans, ass was an unmentionable word, so they said ass, a similar sounding word, but can also mean donkey, so not so vulgar. So in American English, if I say to you, move your ass, I could be asking you to put your donkey somewhere else, or that you should change the position of your derrière. Interestingly, in British English, we have retained two separate words which should have distinct meanings: arse and ass. If you call someone an ass, it means that they are stubborn or obstinate or foolish, just like a donkey. So Mr. Bumble in Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens says, "The law is an ass," meaning the law is foolish. However, due to the influence of the American ass, this British usage referring to someone as an ass, a stubborn person, is dying out. So the euphemism treadmill kept on turning, and arse or ass at some point seemed too rude to some. So then you got bum in British English and butt in American English, although none as refined as derrière. Returning to toilets, in British English we still say toilet, but in American English they took it one step further. It became bathroom, then restroom and powder room, phrases we don't say in British English. Now, if you're sitting comfortably on your derrière, let me tell you about the word pregnant. The term pregnant was coined in the early 15th century, and it comes from the Latin pre, meaning before, and nasci, meaning be born. And for a long time the term was avoided in polite conversation. There are many euphemisms that have sprung up over time: with child, expecting, in the family way. In 1950s America, the word pregnant was banned from TV, presumably because its mention implied that people engaged in sexual activities and that this information could corrupt the youth of America and, I don't know, make them all communists or something. Lucille Ball was the big TV star of the 1950s. She had a hit sitcom called I Love Lucy. In its day, it was the most watched TV show in the United States. In season 2, she became pregnant in real life. Now, what should they do? Even seeing a pregnant woman on the screen was often regarded as too risky. But in the end, they relented and they decided to incorporate it into the plot. But for the whole time, they never once used the word pregnant.
A baby? Yeah, baby. That's a word my grandmother made up for tiny little people.
In fact, the episode where she reveals her pregnancy is entitled Lucy is on Scent. Yes, they used the foreign language trick to get around the censor. On Scent is the French word for pregnant. Let's talk about something a bit more serious, and those are the terms to describe someone with intellectual disability. It may surprise you to hear that back in the 1920s, the terms idiot, moron and imbecile were actually terms used by psychiatrists to talk about different IQ ranges. Imbeciles were said to have an IQ of between 25 and 50, idiot an IQ below 25, and moron an IQ of 51 to 70. And not surprisingly, these clinical terms got picked up in everyday language and they got used as insults and completely lost their original medical meaning. So psychiatrists had to find new words to describe the condition, and they chose retarded until inevitably this got thrown about as an insult, and that in turn was replaced by intellectually challenged, intellectually disabled. We've left those behind, and nowadays in British English you talk about a person with learning difficulties. Let's tackle another word with an interesting history. Let's talk about bastards. And I'm not talking about your ex or your boss. That is the current usage, meaning a nasty person. So if I say my boss is such a bastard, you're probably not referring to the fact that your boss's parents are not married, which is hardly a cause for stigma these days. The term bastard comes from Old French. In modern French, it's bâtard, which is either derived from the Old Germanic bost, meaning a union, or Old French fils de baste, born on a cart rather than in the matrimonial bed. This is plausible as there is a similar expression in German, Bankling, child begotten on a bench. Earlier, bastard wasn't a pejorative word. In fact, it was the usual word to refer to the illegitimate offspring of noblemen. William the Conqueror was earlier known as William the Bastard. If you see Fitz in a surname, it probably alludes to an illegitimate child. Fitzroy means the illegitimate child of the king. The French word fils means son, and roi is king. Fitzsimmons, therefore, would be the illegitimate child of Simon. So even outside of marriage, their lineage was important. Anyway, I digress. Returning to the euphemism treadmill, bastard got tarnished sometime down through the centuries. So we start seeing euphemisms such as illegitimate child, a softer alternative, but it still carried a stigma, born out of wedlock, more neutral, but still implied something undesirable, and the rather sweet and romantic sounding love child. Nowadays, with changing attitudes towards marriage and family, the stigma of an illegitimate child has all but gone. These days, the term you often hear is a non-marital child, so stating a fact without any judgment. Side note here in France, a bâtard is a type of bread, sort of a small chunky baguette. And what amuses me is that you can get one made from wholemeal wheat. Now, wholemeal in French is complet. So yes, you can get from your local boulangerie a bâtard complet, a complete bastard. And yes, here it is. Did I just buy it to show you for this video to make a cheap gag? Well, I couldn't possibly comment on that anyway, could I? And by the way, I did some research, and it's called a bastard because it's not a baguette and it's not a roll. It's kind of the bastard offspring of the two, something in between. Anyway, let's return to more serious matters. We're going to tackle the highly sensitive subject of ethnicity. Now, in my lifetime, what we call a black person has gone through many iterations of the euphemism treadmill, although the term black has been constant throughout. Now, when I was very young, you would hear a black person being described as a Negro. Negro, by the way, just means black in Spanish. And Martin Luther King used Negro several times in his I Have a Dream speech. The term got tainted and gave way to coloured in the 1970s. And in the US, the pressure group for black rights was the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People. But the term's no longer acceptable. Around the 1990s, African American became the preferred term. However, this doesn't resonate with everyone. In fact, some black Americans hate it. Here's a quote from Dr Melody Mcleod. I'll leave a link to the full article in the description. I am not an African American. Stop calling me that. I am an American, a proud black American, period. Don't cut my citizenry in half. Don't make it sound as if I immigrated from another country to the US. I was born here. I was born in New York, not Nairobi, nor Namibia. Let's talk about the indigenous peoples of the Americas. They were first called Indians, which is of course wholly inaccurate and based on a European misunderstanding. Columbus thought that he'd landed in Asia, so he called the indigenous people Indians. It was later replaced by the more sensitive and more accurate Native American. However, many native peoples actually prefer the term American Indian. In Canada, they refer to themselves as First Nations or First Peoples, or you give the name of the tribe. In Central and South America, the term Indian is highly pejorative. In Spanish, you might hear indígena, indigenous, comunidad, community, and pueblo, people. It's complicated. For this and for many other of the cases we've talked about today, if you're not sure, the best thing to do is ask. Back when I was a kid growing up in Britain, an Asian was somebody from the Indian subcontinent. And if you wanted to refer to somebody from China or Japan, then you'd call them an Oriental. However, over the last few years, this term has become taboo. Even though the Chinese language, the Korean language, the Japanese language are all still referred to as Oriental languages. In London, you can study at SOAS, School of Oriental and Asian Studies, but you can't call a person Oriental anymore. Now the preferred terms are South Asian, from someone from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc., and East Asian for Chinese, Japanese, Korean, etc. And one thing I've noticed recently, the language spoken in Iran and much of Afghanistan that was called Persian for many centuries, but this yielded to Farsi, the Persian word for the Persian language, and this was the politically correct term for some time in recent years. Someone must have reasoned that Farsi is the word they use for their language in their own language, and then we should use that too. But we don't do that with other languages. We don't call French Français or Spanish Español. And someone must have cottoned on to this fact, because the Persian language is now back in fashion. And once again, there's a full circle of the Euphemism Treadmill. In this video, I've just touched on a few examples of the Euphemism Treadmill, and we haven't touched such subjects as sex and sexuality, but I think I'll leave it to you to continue the discussion in the comments. And to those who roll their eyes at this and cry out that we're being woke because we changed the words to make them more socially acceptable, it's important to remember that this process has been going on for hundreds of years, maybe thousands. Most people are just naturally inclined to speak respectfully and to avoid words that could cause hurt. And this is a good thing, even though sometimes we are overly cautious. But it does create this challenge because most people are sensitive and want to use the right language. But the worry is that even the kindliest folk with the best of intentions may unwittingly get into trouble because he or she hasn't read the latest style guides. So we do need to be tolerant of those who mean well but may not be up to date with the latest phrase. And if you're interested in the English language, then do sign up to my newsletter, The Rambler. It's free, link in the description. Or become a patron for exclusive content and more. That's all for now. Have a beautiful day.